welcome. I'm Tafarra Gadamu. The Sudan and South Sudan talks have been going on for a while now. But it is only last week that the presidents of both countries met here in Addis Ababa and signed an agreement that is considered a major breakthrough in addressing the conflicts raging there. Will that hold? My guest today, Abdul Mohammed, is a senior political advisor and chief of staff to the African Union High Implementation Panel on the Sudan. Welcome back to the program, Abdul.
Thank you. It's been a very long time.
The AU High-Level Panel to Northern South Sudan, which has been around for a while, didn't seem to get where it should have been in the first place.
Well, yes, you are right. 3 years. The AU High-Level Panel was engaged on the Sudan issue. First, internally to Sudan, to the North Sudan, on the Darfur issue, but subsequently on the North-South issue, especially after the referendum, because there were still outstanding issues that were not resolved before the referendum and that needed to be negotiated very carefully. It's very complex, extremely complex. I myself, I did not realize how complex it was, until we got into it. Therefore, everything has to be negotiated piecemeal by piecemeal. At the same time, also, you have to take into account the historical grievances, the historical complexity under which these two countries were put together, and then they had to split. So when you add up all of that, it was not a very easy negotiation.
So that's why it needed an outsider to kind of prevail over both countries, particularly after the referendum.
From the beginning, the African Union determined that Sudan is a very strategic country.
Strategy meaning, was it volatile?
Very volatile. It is situated in the part of the continent that is already very susceptible to instability. Therefore, the breakup of the Sudan, if it is not done in a manner that will provide for soft landing, it will actually ignite a new war in the region on different agendas. It could have a religious slant, it could be ethnicity based, it could invite outsiders, to intervene. Therefore, containing Sudan and making sure that the Sudanese will negotiate in earnest and resolve all of their outstanding issues peacefully has been the main strategic obsession with the African Union.
It still is.
It still is. And that's why, for example, unprecedented negotiating team was put together under the leadership of the former president of South Africa, President Thabo Mbeki, who himself is very experienced, negotiator, and also President Pierre Buyoya, the former president of Burundi, and then the former president of Nigeria, Abubakar Abdusalami. So the fact that they have assembled three formidable former head of states to attend to the Sudan problem and try to find a peaceful resolution just shows you how deeply the African Union was concerned about Sudan. In addition to that, Prime Minister Meles, from the beginning, was also a party to this negotiation. For all practical purposes, he was intimately involved from the beginning, and he is the one who encouraged the African Union to really seek the assistance of President Thabo Mbeki to attend to the Sudan problem. So you have on the one hand Prime Minister Meles representing IGAD, and then you have President Mbeki and the two other presidents representing the African Union. So the combination really was very, very formidable, and it's a testimony to the great importance African institutions, both AU and IGAD, attached to the Sudan issue.
I know all these figures that you mentioned and the high-level panel, they have tried their best, but the problems are left unsolved. There are major sticking points which could reverse the whole scenario.
Yeah.
Is that too simplistic?
It's been 2-3 years. It just shows you that there is no quick fix. To the kind of problem the Sudanese were dealing with. You could not have solved it by a mediation that pops in and pops out. They come in and they do it in a day or two and leave. It wouldn't work. You needed a committed, dedicated negotiators who will not only deal with the current realities, but also try to understand the historical backgrounds, the historical reasons why this complexity is confronting us. So you needed patience, perseverance, and endurance, and nobody could have provided that except the Africans. And after a long, protracted negotiation, at the last round, which was a marathon round, 3 weeks of negotiation, in addition to that, the head of states, both President Bashir and President Salva Kiir, came to Addis and stayed for 3-4 days, unprecedented. And the sum total result of that was a breakthrough.
Why that is a breakthrough?
Because they signed 8 important agreements, including security, which is pivotal, because there was an active war going on between the two countries. So a comprehensive security agreement was reached, which provides for buffer zone, which provides for the deployment of monitors to monitor the borders, which provides for Ethiopian troops under the UN flag to monitor it, to assist the monitors. So that was achieved, and both countries have also pledged not to interfere in each other's internal affair, that they will not harbor and support and sponsor insurgency groups from each other's countries. And it's a very comprehensive, unprecedented security agreement was signed. Number 2, the other extremely important one is oil. The oil is in South Sudan, but the pipeline that takes it into the international market is in the north. And the oil was interrupted as a result of the conflict between the two. They couldn't agree on price, they couldn't agree on a number of things, therefore it was interrupted. And the consequence of that interruption has brought hardship to the people of South Sudan as well as also to the north. So it was very, very difficult to negotiate that. We failed a number of times, but at the last round we were able to negotiate a very fair, amicable, beneficial to both sides deal. So that's a major achievement.
Well, I understand, but the resumption of the flow of oil, as you said, is quite a major step forward.
Yeah.
But without solving the problem in Abyei, it's not going to be a lasting one.
I think what
Don't you
need to, let me get back to Abyei separately. You need to appreciate the significance of the 8 agreements that were just signed. As I said, which included security, which included oil, which included trade, banking, all the kind of agreement that will make it possible for these two countries to normalize the relationship. So you need this. The fact that you have this agreement will make it easier, or will make the Abyei issue, which is still outstanding, more manageable, because you are creating actually an enabling environment in which addressing these outstanding issues like Abyei would be much, much manageable and much easier.
How manageable would that be? Give me a little perspective on that.
Okay, the Abyei issue, very complex. The fundamental solution for it is to provide a mechanism for the people in Abyei to have a referendum. Okay, and the referendum will determine whether the people of Abyei will go south or north. And Abyei is also a place where the two communities meet, the southerners and the northern nomadic population. So you have to make sure that before the referendum takes place, there are enough confidence building measures that will make the referendum manageable and easier.
Something that has never been done when the referendum of last year.
Exactly, it was not done. So you need to have an enabling environment. You need to have arrangements which will make the outcome of the referendum a win-win, because by definition a referendum has a winner and a loser. Somebody will win and somebody will lose. So what we have been trying to impress upon the parties is to minimize the impact of the loss, to make sure that the side that will lose will be compensated by other measures, which are economic, which is, for example, since it's nomad, it will include nomadic population, the right to, to passage, for grazing land. Make sure that the intercommunal relationship will continue to be amicable. I mean, all of these arrangements have to take place, and for that to be done, you need a secure environment. And you have now, under the UN flag, Ethiopian troops who are actually providing for that. So in the past 1 year and 2 months or so, since the deployment of the Ethiopian forces, the security environment has improved tremendously. It has improved so much so that the IDPs, the internally displaced population, mainly the Southerners, are going back. And because of the presence of the Ethiopian troops under the UN flag, migration to the south for the nomads was peaceful this time around. And we need to institutionalize that. We need to rebuild the intercommunal relationship between these two peoples, that when the political decision comes, it will not be the negative impact will be minimized.
Well, true, but when the referendum comes, it should have happened years back, right? But it didn't, for reasons that you...
environment was not conducive.
Right. But once a referendum is put in place and the vote is counted, definitely Abiy is going to go either way. It's going to be north or south.
Yeah.
And it is going to be quite a major loss for any one of those countries.
I think, if you see Abiy in isolation, in of itself, it's very problematic. But if you see Abiy in the context of the larger agreement between these two countries, security agreement, economic agreement, and most importantly, soft border agreement. Soft border means, African borders. This is what people need to realize. African borders have two aspects to it. There is a colonial border, and the colonial border is important for purposes of legal separation of the countries. This is Ethiopia, this is Eritrea, this is Sudan, this is South Sudan. It only serves that purpose. And then there is a people's border. Okay, a people's border means this colonial border is transcended by people's border. People interactive trade going on, people intermingle, there is intermarriage, there are different associations that bind people in this country and that country.
But these are undermined by the very fact that there is quite a resource called oil, which is always...
Exactly, it undermines. That's why leaders and governments have to take into account not only the colonial border, they have also to take into account the people's border, especially in context of integration. So when they just signed an agreement for a soft border, the government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan. This will make it easier to see the Abiy issue in the context of the soft border. This will be easier for them to see the Abiy issue in the context of trade between the two countries, which is very, very active. As a matter of fact, what people don't realize is that almost 40% of the people of South Sudan live along the border with North Sudan. The same also in the north, and these people interact each other. The fact that you are two separate countries does not mean you have to build a Berlin Wall between these two peoples.
But it depends on
the soft border. If the soft border agreement is fully implemented with political courage, then it will make it easier for the people of Abiy, whether they go south or north, to be anchored in this soft border framework.
That's what I'm driving at. I mean, it requires the political, if you will, sacrifice on both sides of the border to be able to reach to what you call a very pragmatic solution, which is a soft border. But basically, are these people serious about peace, the brothers in North and South Sudan?
I think so. I have come to the conclusion after the last round of negotiation and after the signing of these 8 agreements that they are very serious. I think both sides, the elites of the north as well as of the south, have come to the realization, the continuation of the conflict does not serve them any purpose anymore. They have realized their limits. By the way, there is a kind of a dictum in negotiation. A negotiation becomes successful when both parties realize that they cannot continue to pursue their national interests or their political interest through war, then the other options now become attractive and indispensable. And then you make a strategic decision for peace. That's exactly what happened at the last round of talks.
But they need political legitimacy. Yeah.
At the last round of talks, both sides, make the strategic decision for peace. And as a result of that, it was easier for us to assist them to realize this strategic decision that were made.
But they need political legitimacy back home.
That's true. That's another issue.
They are not strong governments.
Well, both of them have formidable governance challenges, not only governance, economic challenges as well, that for them to address these issues in a manner that you said legitimate requires them that they have peace with each other and focus on correcting whatever is wrong in their respective countries. This agreement, this peace, so that they will focus in addressing these outstanding monumental challenges each of them face in their respective countries.
Are they much more stronger than they used to be after this agreement has been reached in Addis Ababa?
Well, look,
they came out winners, all of them, right? That's what you're trying to hit at.
Yeah, it's a win-win for them. There is a principle. It is very, very difficult to start negotiation between two protagonists. It is even more difficult to sustain the negotiation. And the real difficulty starts once there is an agreement and you are obligated to implement it. Therefore, now we have made it possible for them to have agreements on key areas. The challenge now is to persuade them to implement it. If they implement it, then they will sustain peace. If they don't implement it, then they can go back, easily to war again.
Which way do you think they will go?
I think they will. They're very serious. I am now very confident that they will implement what they have agreed upon. All of us are going to hold them accountable. More importantly, the people of the two Sudans will hold them accountable, and also we will watch. And for the sake of the region, for the sake of their own people, and for the sake of Africa, they better implement this agreement that they have signed.
So is there hope in both countries? I mean, I'm talking about the people. Are they weary of all these conflicts and so on, which have been raging for several decades?
Yeah.
This is the first time you think?
Exactly. The people of Sudan are very, very tired of war. They have paid dearly the consequences of war. They have still areas that conflict is still raging, So the potential of these two countries is just amazing, amazing. Both of them are really endowed with natural resources, And North Sudan, the agricultural potential of North Sudan is phenomenal, They could be the breadbasket for this entire region. And they have educated population. They have population, the diaspora that is highly, mobile, skilled. If Sudan has peace, the potential is really infinite. The same with South Sudan. Very small population, but abundant natural resources, and they will be actually requiring skilled labor from the region to come and assist them. So the potential of these two countries is so phenomenal, it is worth prevailing on them to have peace.
But South Sudan needs to do a lot more skilled labor-wise to catch up. And that puts that very particular country in a difficult position. Because it's an expat community, basically, that's Southern Sudan, run by outsiders and not the Southern Sudanese.
It's true. South Sudan has a particular challenge. It basically it did not inherit, institutions when it became independent. Therefore, they have to start from scratch. And building state institutions takes time. Takes time. You need peace to build institutions. You need skilled labor to build institutions. On all the scales of human development scale, they are still at the bottom. So they need peace in order to build their country, and they will require external assistance. This external assistance could only bear fruit if they themselves are well organized and stable. So they need peace in order to build the institutions that will make it possible for them to realize the fruit of independence. The same in the north, better institutions, but these institutions have been seriously compromised by war. So they also need peace to strengthen, to rebuild, to readjust, and also to build a governance structure which is much more inclusive, much more legitimate. So both sides, in order to go forward and fulfill the aspiration of their people, they must start with having peace.
These two countries could have learned a lot better, a lot more from the Ethio-Eritrean situation. Southern Sudan, Africa's newest nation, but grappling with old problems.
Yeah, it's yes, I think you are right. Your observations is correct. You have to learn the proper lesson, and there was a live, important lesson in the region, and they did not take the proper measure of the experience between Ethiopia and Eritrea, even though the historical circumstances are very different. For example, signing an agreement on soft border is a big lesson. They should have learned it at the beginning, but the fact that they are learning it is not too late. It's late, but it's not too late. Soft border is one of the biggest lessons that they learn.
Oh, even a hard one.
It's a hard one. And anyway, when you take a more strategic view, it was in the interest of Africa, and I said also of Ethiopia, to make sure that the Sudan conflict is contained and resolved in a manner that is now being done. Because the regional stability is paramount for us to realize in each of the respective countries our economic potential, and now, so when you combine these positive developments in the Sudan with positive development in Somalia, everything being relative, I think the building block for learning the big lesson and move in the direction of stability and peace and development is being learned. It's late, but it's not too late.
Are you trying to be an optimist? It's the thorniest of issues as still there to be resolved.
I think I have nothing but to be optimistic. Look at what's happening in the region as a whole. Ethiopia, the development in Ethiopia, the growth, the economic development, the transformation that's taking place, provides one with nothing but an optimist scenario. The fact that after the death of, Prime Minister Meles, a very peaceful, orderly transition took place is just provides you nothing but to be optimistic about the prospect. And Ethiopia being the largest country, 80 million people, the stability of that anchors the stability of the others. And this new development in the Sudan is very important. It's a step in the right direction, but what we need to do is to consolidate it and to make sure that the leaders of these two countries live up to their responsibility. And in Somalia, the African Union forces in Somalia are on the offensive. Al-Shabaab is now being isolated, is being defeated. The liberation of Kismayo is a major strategic defeat for Al-Shabaab, and the fact that a peaceful election took place and the incumbent stepped down in favor of the new leader, another indicator of to be optimist. So when you combine all of this, you have to count your blessings and try to consolidate it. So this is the time in our region to look forward, not backward. And with that, our only outstanding issue remaining is, of course, the Ethiopia-Eritrea one. But Somalia is stabilized, Sudan, getting back to development and to peaceful, I think it becomes more manageable.
Well, thank you very much. As usual, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me.